Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be running through my take on Prime Minister's questions, which didn't involve the Prime Minister as he fled the country last week after the by-elections and hasn't been seen since. This meant that Dominic Raab was deputising, and as is usual, Angela Rayner, Deputy Leader for Labour, took to the dispatch box as well for the session. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the session actually got quite rowdy at one point as Angela Rayner put Raab in his box a few times, so much so that the Speaker had to intervene and quiet MPs down. Rayner drew on the controversy of the police action to suppress the political opposition of Steve Bray by saying that it was ironic that Tory MPs were making so much noise when they had legislated to ban noisy protests. Raab also at one point winked at Rayner, rather creepily, and then proceeded to take the piss out of her for going to the opera. I mean, imagine that. Claims to be working class but enjoys culture? No, I've never heard anything so ridiculous in my life. And that's what these privately educated spivs think about us, isn't it? Culture's for them. Nice things are for them. Comfort's for them. Everything's for them, except the hard graft. That's for us so that they can enjoy their life of luxury. That's what they think of us. Will people please get it? But that was later on. She began the session by getting a few quick digs in by welcoming the two newest members of the House, the Labour and Liberal Democrat MPs who had taken 2 seats off the Conservatives last week. She noted that the Conservatives had lost 2 by-elections in a day. She could have pointed out that they've lost 4 now in the space of a year. Frankly, losing that many by-elections in a single parliament is not good news for any party. She said that it's no wonder the Prime Minister has fled the country, leaving his deputy to carry the can. Of course, in reality, we know that Johnson is attending G7 and NATO summits. It was just a bit of a laugh. But this is the sort of uncomfortable line that Tory MPs are going to have to put up with while they continue to put up with Boris Johnson as their leader. She said that instead of showing some humility, Johnson intends to limp on into the 2030s and asked if Raab thinks the cabinet will prop him up for this long. I'd have added, because the country certainly won't, but she got her own version in after this answer. But, you know, I think this was just the opening salvo, of course, to get things started. She was attempting to get a cabinet minister to have to publicly stand by Johnson to show the country that they're all in it together, basically. Raab got up smirking, obviously thinking he's got this covered. You should say this. I've got it sorted. He said that his side want Johnson to go on a lot longer than Rayner wants Starmer to carry on. He then said that the Tories had a working majority of 75, that they were delivering record low unemployment, he said, which is only true because they count people on 0 hours contracts who work no hours. More policing, he said, which is untrue. Powerfully untrue, in fact. There are still many thousands fewer police officers than under the last Labour government. And there should be more because our population's grown. He also said about tougher sentencing. This is also a lie because they've been closing down courts and defunding the criminal justice system. The delays for cases coming to court is now enormous, and the problem with hearing a case years later is that the witnesses' memories are a bit hazy then. So you don't quite get the convictions because if you can't rely on a witness statement, no sentence at all, tough or otherwise, if there's no court case or if it's acquitted because the witnesses have forgotten things. He then tried to throw in the rail strikes, attempting to tie those to Labour. And this was basically how he tried to deal with Rayner's questions throughout. It's always like, oh, throw in a thing about the strikes, throw in a thing about Corbyn, throw in this, throw in that. Never answering the question, of course. You know, and Rayner came back on the first point about Starmer by saying what she wanted was for the leader of the opposition not to be the leader of the opposition, but the Prime Minister of this country, and that it couldn't come quick enough. Her words. She then said that the country can't stomach this Prime Minister for another 8 years. His own backbenchers can't stomach for him for another 8 minutes. And she said if they continue to prop him up, she doubted the voters would stomach him for even 8 seconds at the ballot box. She pointed out that the Tories under Johnson were tax high, low growth, and that if Johnson was still about in the 2030s, then at this rate, the British would have endured 55 tax rises. She asked how many more tax rises will this government inflict on working families before they say enough is enough. And then it was just the usual parroted lines for Raab. Like I say, you can't be trusted to respond to his own to the questions. I accept that they were a little bit facetious at this point. Still, as I said of Ian Blackford in the past too, what's the point in direct questions when you do not get a direct or a truthful answer in response? But all Raab could do was come back with their plans for great things. Oh, we've got this plan, it's brilliant. It's like, yeah, you've been in power for 12 years. Surely one of these plans should have been finished by now. Johnson's been in power for 3 years. I mean, all we get is talk of plans. We don't actually get plans, just talk of them. Because they're not plans, they're intended outcomes. Not once has an actual plan been published to meet these outcomes, and not one has any promised programme for these outcomes been completed either. Of course not, because there's never any plan to do so. Rayner pointed out the amount of private jet flights that Raab personally uses against the tax rises this government keeps bringing in. She pointed out the cuts to our defence spending, presumably to poke at the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who is wanting an increase in defence spending. Raab kept trying to press the same knackered buttons. Yeah, but you support the strikes. Yeah, but you support Corbyn. Blah, 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 blah. She pointed to Raab's time spent on a sun lounger while Afghanistan fell. She was saying, I don't need to take defence advice from you or something like that, because when Afghanistan was falling, you were on a sun lounger. But she asked how many more manifesto promises will be broken before Johnson goes as well. When will Raab grow a backbone, tell him to quit? That was basically it. There was no attempt of questions intending to trap Raab on matters of policy. What would be the point? Apart from the fact it's easy for him to avoid answering on the basis that it'll be other ministers that decide. He's just the Justice Secretary. He might be Deputy Prime Minister, but he knows nought. And it's quite credible for him to say he knows nought. Or he could say that the Prime Minister will be revealing the details later. Indeed, several MPs who asked questions later in the session basically got that answer. So Rayner did what Starmer's been doing for the last couple of weeks, and I hope continues in a way, pointing out the government's failures, doing it in an engaging way. So you can clip these little things, share them on social media, pointing out the way it's hurting ordinary working families. The high tax and low growth is a line that Labour have been using for a while now, because that also upsets the core Tory support. They don't like that. Remember that the Tories lost the safe seat of Chesham and Amersham last year before the scandals. This wasn't Partygate. It's nothing to do with that. It was before Johnson lost personal popularity. The reason they lost that seat was precisely because of that economic performance that traditional Tories abandoned Johnson for the Lib Dems. And they'll continue to do so until Johnson goes and a successor has a different economic strategy. It's all right Johnson trying to hold on while Partygate blows over. Even if it does, I don't think it will, but even if it did, that core issue is still there and going to lose him seats. And I don't think any successor to Johnson is going to fundamentally change that. We'll see, but I really don't think they will. I would still like Labour to come back with what they would do differently. I know they shouldn't commit to manifesto policies just yet, but they could say what they would do in the here and now and just say, look, if we were in power in the here and now, we would do this. You're not promising you would do it in 2.5 years' time. You're just saying in the current situation, this is what we would do. It's way more powerful to be seen to be constructively critical than just critical. It also stops the Tories being able to say Labour have got no plan. Because people watching it will think, oh yeah, Labour didn't say what they would do. I would cut that out. But then on to Ian Blackford of the SNP. So he took much the same approach as Rayner in many ways. Not for the first time in recent weeks. Didn't bother to ask any questions. Pushed his own policies. He brought up Sturgeon's referendum campaign again. I'll be discussing the latest announcement tomorrow. And asked if the opposition to their plans would make the case for continuing Westminster rule. Raab just responded, as you'd expect, by saying it wasn't the time for another independence referendum. Now, I do feel that Blackford could have noted, well, look, hang on a minute here. There's a supermajority for a referendum in the Scottish Parliament. There's a supermajority for a referendum amongst the Scottish seats in this House. So when would the right time be? Be specific and explain your answer, please. I know Raab would have tried to dodge it, but in doing so, it would have made him look very evasive. Unfortunately, Blackford didn't do that and made a bit of a campaign speech. Fine. But Raab then just got to respond with criticisms of the SNP's competence in government, as again you would expect. Finally, I cannot help but bring up Liz Saville-Roberts' question. Now, this is the Westminster leader replied, and she asked about enshrining the right to self-determination in his Bill of Rights, Dominic Raab's Bill of Rights. Raab didn't answer the question, so clearly he's not going to. But he did say that he will be strengthening free speech. I thought, this is an odd thing to say when his government have just legislated to imprison people for 10 years for speaking out against the government. So that's you'll get a longer sentence for speaking out against the government, potentially, than a violent criminal would get. But party politics aside, it is a very sad state of affairs when we've found ourselves with a government who spout a constant stream of lies and hypocrisy, and we might still have 2.5 more years of them. And we can't guarantee that they're definitely gone after that. But that was PMQs for today. There'll only be a few more before they break up for the summer recess, really, a few more weeks. Then they'll be back in September, and then it'll spice up. Because not only will we be gearing up for the conference season, but the Privileges Committee will be getting ready to make their judgment on Boris Johnson's alleged lies as well. But for now, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.